we, alongside being one of the largest exchanges in the world, are also interested in innovation and the future of technology, specifically in the regulatory space. So as you may be familiar with our compliance and surveillance products, we are market leading with Smart's surveillance, which is a trade surveillance solution, which some of you may use. And what Smart's is able to do is able to detect trading anomalies, detect alerts across the whole spectrum of compliance, so market manipulation, wash trades, spoofing, layering, front running, and so on. So it's able to detect any type of market misconduct across multiple asset classes, so not just exchange traded products like cash equities, futures and options, but also in the OTC space, in terms of FX, bonds, swaps, IRSs and so on. So we feel that we are a market leader in the monitoring and surveillance space, and Smarts has always done well with what we refer to as structured data. So structured data is trade data, it's the ability to be able to capture prices, bid offer spreads, to be able to understand what's happening with order books. And that's one aspect of monitoring and surveillance, to understand that this price is an anomaly, or that there's one beneficiary but one beneficial owner for a bid and an offer, so there's a possibility of a wash trade. That's an area that is very important, but there's another area that is becoming more and more important, and that's the unstructured data. So the unstructured data is actually in the form of communication and correspondence. This is a space that NASDAQ hasn't historically been involved in. And in March this year, we formed a strategic partnership with a company called Digital Reasoning. So Digital Reasoning is a company that has been around for about 15 years, and they have specialized in the machine learning, artificial intelligence space, and detecting meaning from unstructured data, which is basically communication. They have been, like I said, they've been in this space for 15 years. They've worked in a number of different sectors. About 5 years ago, they moved into financial markets, and their first customer was Goldman Sachs. So 5 years ago, they started working with Goldman, and Goldman Sachs were interested in being able to marry what they could see on the trading side, so the structured data, with what was happening in their organization on the unstructured side. So what were their traders talking about? What were they talking about internally? What were they talking about externally with their clients? And also, who were they connecting with? Which institutions, which entities were they in direct contact with? As you know, especially I guess in Europe and the US, there's been a number of different fines recently, and going back over the last 4 to 5 years, whether it's LIBOR fixing, whether it's manipulating the market on a derivatives trade. And what we are finding is that a lot of these events occur over time. So there's manipulation, there's collusion between traders over a period of time. So there's an intention to move the market before it actually occurs. And some of this can be captured through the communication that these traders have internally and externally. The banks haven't been able to do a great job at this, hence the recent fines that we saw with UBS, with BNP Paribas, so on and so forth. So this sort of technology is very important to financial institutions, because they want to be predictive, right? You can either wait until you get a trade alert and then start to investigate it and think, right now, let's be reactive and see what to do, or you can be predictive and understand, okay, these group of traders or these individuals are talking about, collusive behavior or market manipulation or insider trading, so they have the intent to do something. The regulators in Europe have picked up on this intention more recently in the market abuse regulation that was introduced in the United Kingdom earlier this year. So historically, a financial institution would only be responsible for trading behavior once it had occurred. So a trade has occurred, it has moved the market adversely, and therefore that institution is now going to be penalised. However, now their stance has changed somewhat, and they're saying, right, okay, now we need to look at, you need to monitor the intention of a trader. So you need to be able to see what the trader's intention was before that trade was ever executed. If that intention was ill-meaning or rogue, then you could still be penalised, even if the trade never occurs. Okay, so if there's a group of traders that are trying to fix a benchmark, or they're trying to move the market, then they, even if they are not successful, that institution will be held accountable for that intention and not being able to pick it up. So this is why, being able to monitor the communication side of things has become extremely important for these institutions. So I'm going to just do I hope you can all see this clearly, but I'll talk through it a little bit. Synthesis is the platform that Digital Reasoning sells. We, as NASDAQ, now are the exclusive partner that will resell this technology to the capital markets, financial market space. And the way that it works is that it ingests data. So it takes in data from multiple sources. And the sources are all described there. So Synthesis can take in data from regular email, from Bloomberg chat, from Reuters dealing, from Link, from Skype, from instant messaging of any description, and to some extent social media as well. So if, for example, you have access to employees' phones and data, and they're using social media on those phones, then of course we can ingest that as well. It doesn't apply to every single social media application. There's some limitations, but we can work with quite a few. And then what we will do is we'll take all of that data and we will combine it with structured data, so data that you can provide us in the form of employee information, in terms of their roles, in terms of their full names and aliases, and together with the structured data, that's the metadata. Metadata is basically the signatures on emails. At the bottom of an email we can pretty much determine the sender's role, the sender's full name, the sender's address, the institution that they are working at. And we can combine that with the communications that we are ingesting. And what Synthesis will do is it will read all of that information, and it uses something called NLP, which is natural language processing. Natural language processing is a form of artificial intelligence. So what it uses is something called neural networks and tokenization. So what the machine will do is it will actually, instead of looking for keywords or certain sentences in an email or a chat, it will actually start to understand the context and the meaning of the whole transcript. So if you can imagine, like a human being, if you were to read an email, we can extract meaning from that whole email because we understand the full context. What the legacy systems currently do is they look for words or they look for sentences, which we refer to as lexicons, which can sometimes provide positive results, but most of the time they just provide false positives. So false positives is just alerts which mean nothing. You extract no meaning and it's just noise. Natural language processing is more human-like in the way that it derives the meaning from that language. We also look at entity and fact extraction. So as I mentioned, the metadata that we get from either databases of employees or through the signatures on emails, we can use that to understand who the individuals are that are communicating with one another, which institutions they work for, and what they are talking about, if they're referring to other other people, other institutions. We will use all of that information to build a profile. So there's two components in terms of what synthesis does. Firstly, it will provide you alerts that's extracting meaning from the actual communication. Secondly, it will create a profile, which I will show you, which is literally a spider's web that will be able to connect different individuals to internal, external individuals, and to institutions and entities. And then we talked a little bit about what is cognitive computing and how does it work. Cognitive systems are based on a number of algorithms, neural networks, intelligent assistants. But the purpose of them is to learn in the same way that the human mind does. So it is an iterative process. So what that means is that you will need to train the platform. We use something called model training for the machine to understand these are the things that we're looking for, these are the true positives, and these are the false positives, so that you can guide synthesis. And of course it has a lot of exposure already through the institutions that currently use synthesis that I mentioned. However, every single use case is different, so depending on whether you're a regulator and you're looking for you're going through data sets to look for something to help you with an investigation, or whether you're actually a broker or a bank that's actually looking for day-to-day alerts because you just want to make sure that everything that's going on is okay, you will be looking for different things. So you can fine-tune synthesis to look for what you want it to, and that's through the model training. And as it starts to understand what you're looking for, it will become smarter and smarter over time by itself. So it will learn more and more, just like a human would. So essentially, it's like thinking about a human being that is receiving training, and as they receive more and more training, they become more and more smarter. And then, of course, the use of natural language processing, which is really the tokenization that I mentioned, and the entity extraction, and the knowledge representation, which we'll show you some examples of live alerts and profiles in a moment. Just as an example of machine learning and the training example here, we've got on the just on the left-hand side, we've got some training examples that you could use. So you've got my personal email. You want to keep it quiet, and then on the right-hand side here, we've got some predictions. So please keep that between us, though. Is a true positive. Shut your mouth. Laugh out loud. Your secret is safe. I need to speak to you. I will meet you there 5:45 is a false positive, because there's nothing collusive there. So there's nothing there's no intention to conceal anything. And these are the sort of examples that you can provide synthesis. So you can say, look, these are the true positives. These are the things that we want to look for, and these are the false positives. These are the things we don't care about. And the platform will over time begin to understand itself that these are the sort of things that you want, and these are the sort of things that you don't want. I won't go into the technical side too much at all, because we can talk about that in more detail if you would be interested in using the platform or taking a look at it. But essentially, it's an iterative process. We have data scientists that would work with you to understand what you're trying to gain from using synthesis, what your objectives are, what your success factors are, what your risk areas are, and based on those, they will basically build a model for you and train synthesis to look for the language and the behavior and the risk areas that are of interest. So, we take raw data, we ingest it from you. This data, by the way, wouldn't leave your premises, so the data stays on site. We don't take the data anywhere from a privacy point of view, and all our data scientists would be, they would sign agreements as well to ensure that they non-disclosure and privacy agreements so that they can't expose any of your internal data to anybody. And then we go through a training model exercise, data tagging, until we get a very good score of accuracy. So the models will have scores in terms of how accurate they are, in terms of finding what you want, and so on. So it's a very complex diagram, but it's actually a quite straightforward process that we can sort of discuss in more detail. And then the sort of the language features. I mean, when we look at today and what organisations and institutions have looked at historically, more basic forms of surveillance for communication have factored around lexicons, trying to build constructs of sentences that you're looking for. And that process can become quite daunting, because obviously there's so many different ways that you can say something. So, you could sit there and you could write the same sentence 50 times and you may still not find what you're looking for. And it's also something that you have to keep on changing, because the way people write and the way people communicate can evolve and it can change. But as we're becoming more sophisticated, you can see that we're moving away from using metadata and assertions into entity resolution, so being able to understand what organisations are being discussed in a transcript, to NLP, which is the natural language processing, to machine learning. And that's when you're looking for sophisticated risk areas like bribery, for example, where language is very much softer, it's more nuanced. You will have to use more sophisticated tools to decipher those types of risks. So the previous example had a little bit too much data for us to be able, the bandwidth was limited, but this one is intent to conceal. And this is a really good example, because really there's actually nothing again in this text that is it could be picked up potentially with a lexicon or a keyword search, because everything in this particular example is just normal normal words which would be written every day. So it is a case of determining the context and really understanding the meaning of what's being said. But you can see here that there is a communication taking place between Mary Hain at Enron and Ronald Karen. So she says at the top, correct, I wanted to terminate CTS for EPMI too, but others decided this issue. Sorry for any confusion. I'm still waiting to hear from Enron Wind, which is a department within Enron. And they are making some sort of filing. And she says, although we achieved our primary objective, we will unfortunately need to file an errata tomorrow and attach the EES and EMC letters of termination, which were received too late, to correct collation glitches that occurred during production. So what's happening here is that there's something going on within Enron, and it seems like an ample opportunity for this employee, Mary Hain, to actually start deleting references to PGE, which is some sort of internal division that wasn't performing and wasn't doing very well. So what she's now looking to do is because of these circumstances, and we don't need to understand all of those, but what she said here is, we have agreed, I was under the impression that PG had previously terminated its arrangements with the PX, so we agreed to delete all references to PGE. So it's what it is here is an intention to conceal. And again, this is really looking for a needle in a haystack. Somebody just looking to delete everything in the context of things changing and organisational changes. I mean, it just isn't something that would easily be picked up by any kind of legacy platform at all. So she's just thinking, right, okay, this is an opportune time to delete all of this stuff, which isn't particularly great for me, and I'm just going to get rid of everything. And it's looking for a needle in a haystack, right? It's difficult for any platform to determine these things. But what Synthesis has understood is that there's some changes being made organisationally at Enron, based on this communication, and this lady, Mary Hayne, based on those changes, has decided that she's going to delete everything to do with PGE. And it doesn't think that's right. So it's flagged this as an intent to conceal, and that we can find that language is then highlighted in blue here. I'm going to see also if I can get into this bribery one now. We may not be able to, but because this is another good example of how synthesis is able to find very subtle language and nuanced language and erase alerts based on it. So again, this is an individual, Stephen Keane, and he's trying to influence a decision that is being made by the FERC, the Energy Commission, and the government, United States government. So he's determined to influence a decision here. And what he says is, we have an individual called Wayne Vallis of lobbying firm of Vallis Associates. He's offering to get us close to Andrew Lundquist. He's the chairman of the President's Energy Task Force. So he's trying to get close to somebody that can influence their position. And then he says, in White House, for his service, he wants $10,000 plus direct expenses. Now, literally, this is it. This is the only language in this particular email that has raised an alert. So it's the mention of the White House. So Synthesis understands that the White House is a government institution. Through the work that Digital Reasoning have done in the last 15 years, Synthesis can pretty much determine all government institutions as well as financial institutions, and it's associating the White House and a large sum of money, so $10,000. Put together, it seems to think there's something that's going on here that's not quite right, and therefore it's raised an alert for bribery and monetary bribery. Now, again, you couldn't find this because there's actually nothing else in this in this communication that is obvious. And what I'm trying to highlight here isn't sort of obvious communication that any platform could find. I'm trying to find really subtle things that most platforms wouldn't. And we know now that obviously there was a lot of corruption in Enron. They were trying to influence, the White House. They were trying to influence people in the FERC, that's the Energy Commission in the United States. I mean, all of the behaviour that took place was very, very corrupt. Obviously, they were not able to detect that in time to save Enron. But if you think about the technology that we have right now and we have today, maybe you could predict some of this was happening and you could have prevented it from ending the way it did. The next thing that I want to move into is profiling. So if we go back to Mary Hayne, who is trying to conceal something, and we want to now look into who she is, who she interacts with, and look at a bigger profile picture of Mary, we can just go in here and we can say, right, we want to see Mary's profile because we think that there's something about her that's not right. So she's trying to hide things and she's trying to conceal things, and we want to understand, more about her. So here we are getting her complete email address, her contact number, her titles as she's a Senior Regulatory Counsel, her address, and we can also see a graph here which demonstrates her alerts, and there seems to be a spike around about this time, so we can actually drill into what was happening at that time and look at all of those emails that she was sending and receiving around about that time as well, which is really good for an investigation, right? So if you're investigating a specific trader and you want to see all their communications around a risk area, it's easy to pinpoint using synthesis. But what we're going to do is we're going to go straight into what we refer to as the knowledge graph. And this was what I mentioned earlier, so this is almost like a spider's web. It gives you all of the relationships that Mary Hayne has. So this isn't just relationships with people, so the people are in purple. It's also the relationships that she has with institutions and organisations, and it's not just internal but it's also external. So who is Mary Hayne in contact with? And also we can see the strengths of those relationships. So the actual grey lines, the thicker the grey line, the more correspondence she has had with that individual, with that institution and with that entity. So if you are conducting an investigation, it's very easy for you to be able to see, right, okay, this individual has a lot of communication with, for example, this government agency or with these other individuals or these other institutions, and this is something that we should be looking into further, so you can connect the dots. So what we can see here is that she has a lot of communication with the FERC. As I mentioned, that's the Energy Commission in the United States. And if we double click on her line into the FERC, you will get another graph which will give you, 1 second, go back. Which will give you all of the people at the FERC that she had communication with. Now this is, again, in an investigation, it's very powerful, right? Because you're not having to go through lots and lots of data and communications to try and determine, you know, who was this individual talking to, who were they colluding with, who was part of that ring, because the platform will do it for you, and it will do it very accurately with precision. So we can see here that Mary Hayne was having regular contact with the FERC, that's the Energy Commission in the United States, and we can see within the FERC, those are the other institutions and individuals that she was in direct contact with. And one of the lines that is really thick, which means that she's having a lot of correspondence with this person, is with this purple individual called Hucker. If we look at the correspondence she's having there, it will bring you into all of the correspondence she's having with this individual, and it will give you the sort of the time frames as well. So we can actually see, you know, what was going on with her and this individual that we know as Hucker. If we want to, we can also find out a little bit more about who he actually is. So if we go back and we actually click on his profile, we can see a little bit more in terms of who he's dealing with. And as you can see, you know, this is becoming now quite, you know, quite a powerful chain. So we can sort of go from one person to the next and find all of the connections, so we know exactly who he is, what he's doing, who he's in correspondence with, and we can really drill into the conduct of these individuals, and that's very compelling for an organisation. Turns out that he's actually James Hucker, and he's the chairman of the FERC, and she shouldn't really be having direct contact with him at all. And this is something that, you know, you could find eventually, and that could be, you know, trailing through lots of data, trailing through lots of emails and data mining. But what synthesis will be able to highlight is, you know, to you very much in a matter of minutes, is these powerful connections and also who these individuals are. So because we've taken in all the metadata from signatures, we know aliases, right? So we know he's known as Mr. Hucker, Jim Hucker, his real name is James Hucker. We know he's the chairman of the FERC. We know who else he's in contact with. And we can now drill into any of these other individuals that he's in contact with and really get to the root of this investigation and know where it stems from. You know, it can sort of, you know, obviously it can go on and on and on. But I think the point is that from, you know, if we look at this from a regulator's point of view, this profiling piece specifically is extremely useful in terms of determining, you know, who individuals really are and who they're in contact with. And it's not just individuals, but institutions and organisations as well. This is really, I mean, there's a lot more that can be shown, but this was actually really what I wanted to show you today, just so that you could get an understanding of synthesis of artificial intelligence and an understanding of how it works and how it can benefit yourselves. I don't know, I know how we are for time, but I think there must be questions about the platform, and maybe through the Q&A session we can, you can learn a little bit more. But I hope at least as a macro kind of presentation that you understood a little bit more about what artificial intelligence can do in the financial market space. And actually it isn't that complex either. In terms of the actual platform, it's very, 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 very simple and easy to use. Thank you.